Oil at $200 a barrel is no longer just a loud scare tactic previously voiced by Iran when blocking the Hormuz Strait. This is a real scenario that Donald Trump is actively considering. Bloomberg reports that the administration of US President Donald Trump is analyzing the possible impact of a sharp increase in oil prices up to $200 per barrel and how all of this will affect the economy. It is noted that this indicates that high-ranking officials in the Trump administration are assessing the consequences of possible extreme scenarios of war with Iran. Meanwhile, Iran has finally established full control over the Strait of Hormuz, while officially granting permission for tankers from India, China, and Russia to pass through. And Donald Trump himself is threatening to deliver a final decisive blow to Iran since peaceful negotiations have failed. My name is Alex Ipici. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation, subscription, or becoming a sponsor on YouTube. All the links and details on how to do this are in the description of this video. I will be grateful for any support you can give. Well, you can support at the end of this episode if you think it was interesting and useful for you. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, it must be stated that Iran has finally established full control over the Hormuz Strait, thereby taking control of the oil flows. Iran has officially started charging fees for tankers passing through the strait and is demanding that the Hormuz Strait be recognized internationally as solely Iranian as a condition for ending the war. Today, Iran officially notified the UN Security Council that tankers from 3 countries are allowed to pass through the strait. Quote, "Non-hostile vessels, including vessels belonging to other states or associated with them, may, provided that they do not participate in acts of aggression against Iran and do not support such acts and also comply with safety and security regulations, exercise the right of safe passage through the Hormuz Strait in coordination with Iranian authorities." As a result, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi clarified that permission to pass through the Hormuz Strait was granted in particular to China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan. Passage is prohibited for everyone else, and the US can't do anything about it. According to the Financial Times, citing ship monitoring data, in recent days Iran has allowed a small number of tankers to travel along the route in its territorial waters, inspecting them before allowing passage through the Hormuz Strait. As a result, Bloomberg reported today that officials in the Trump administration are studying what a potential spike in oil prices to $200 per barrel could mean for the economy. This indicates that high-ranking officials are studying the possible consequences of extreme scenarios of war with Iran. But it is worth noting that modeling how destructive a more significant spike in oil prices could be for growth prospects is part of the regular assessment conducted during periods of tension. And it does not represent a forecast. I want to emphasize that right away. These efforts are aimed at making sure the administration is prepared for all contingencies, including a prolonged conflict. But the very fact that such a scenario is no longer just hypothetical and distant says a lot. According to sources, even before the war began, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressed concern that the conflict would lead to rising oil prices and cause damage. Some of the sources said that high-ranking officials from the U.S. Treasury Department have been expressing concern in the White House for several weeks about fluctuations in oil and gasoline prices. As a result, as you know, this very Scott Bessent first announced the lifting of sanctions on Russia and then on Iran, which kind of shocked even the most ardent Trump supporters. Well, just imagine, you're waging a war against Iran, but you say, okay, go ahead and make money on oil because I think we've gotten ourselves into such a reckless mess that oil prices just started going up. So, in order to at least somewhat restrain these prices, we allow our enemy to sell oil. Nonsense. When information about the scenario of oil prices reaching $200 per barrel leaked to the press, White House Press Secretary Kush Desai was quick to declare that it was all a lie. Here is the quote. Although the Trump administration is always reviewing the calculations, officials do not and have never considered the possibility of oil prices reaching $200 per barrel in various pricing scenarios and economic consequences. And Minister Bessent was not concerned about the short-term disruptions caused by Operation Epic Fury, Besant has repeatedly expressed both his own confidence and that of the entire administration in the long-term prospects for the development of the American economy and global energy markets. I should note here that oil prices rose sharply after the US and Israel attacked Iran on February 28th. The price of West Texas crude oil increased by about 30% and reached $91 per barrel. The price of Brent crude oil rose by almost 40% during the same period and is trading at around $102. And just on Wednesday, the White House stated that diplomatic efforts to end the war are still ongoing, despite the publicity. Iran's rejection of Donald Trump's calls for negotiations and the threat of further military action if a peace agreement is not reached. The White House says that diplomatic efforts and the 5-day deadline for Iran to negotiate an end to the war are ongoing, despite the fact that a $200 oil price would clearly be a huge shock to the global economy. Taking inflation into account, the price has reached this level only once in the past 50 years in 2008, shortly before the global financial crisis. But even at lower prices, according to Bloomberg's forecasts, if the price of oil stays around $100 per barrel for several months, this will lead to higher inflation in the US and Europe and a slowdown in economic growth. That diplomatic efforts to end the war are still ongoing, despite the publicity. The White House stated that diplomatic efforts to end the war are still far from complete. The halt of shipments through the Hormuz Strait, which usually accounts for up to 1.5% of the world's oil and gas exports, has already dealt a blow to the economies of various countries around the world. In the US, the most noticeable consequence has been a 30% increase in retail gasoline prices, which, by the way, has offset the price drop over the past year that Trump called a key economic achievement. Trump boasted, saying, "Look, I created a situation where gasoline became cheaper, but now it has become more expensive." The prospects for US monetary policy are also becoming increasingly uncertain as the Federal Reserve monitors the impact of rising oil prices on inflation. And just last week, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said that it is still too early to assess the consequences of the sharp rise in oil prices for the US economy. But the scenario of oil reaching $200 is being discussed in the White House for a reason. Trump's deadline is coming to an end, and the Pentagon is preparing what's being called the final strike. Axios reports that the Pentagon is preparing for a major escalation in the operation against Iran if diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict fail, and especially if the Hormuz Strait remains blocked. American military leaders are developing options for a decisive strike against Iran, almost all of which include landing troops as well as massive bombings. 4 scenarios involve landing troops and capturing a number of Iranian islands that affect the possibility of blocking the Hormuz Strait and Iran's oil exports. In addition, the US is prepared to sink Iranian oil tankers, something they have not done before. And now the US military has also prepared plans for a ground operation deep inside Iranian territory with the goal of seizing highly enriched uranium. An alternative to this could be carrying out large-scale airstrikes on nuclear facilities to cut off Iran's access to these materials. As a result, as you can understand, any of these scenarios will lead to a sharp spike in oil prices, and people around Trump are clearly preparing for this. I'll leave it at that. What do you think? What conclusions did you draw? Write in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Let me remind you, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video or using the QR code on your screens. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.